続いてはメイ・ネルソンさんによるワールドワイドウェブでも政治はローカル、バルカン化するインターネットを生き残るための計画についてのご講演です。メイ・ネルソンさんはアクセンチャーのサイバー脅威インテリジェンスのセキュリティプリンシパルでいらっしゃいます。サイバー脅威のアクター、行動、動機、傾向の戦略的分析に長けていらっしゃいます。コードブルーでは講演3回目となります。いつもタイムリーなトピックをご紹介いただいています。メイさんからは今回のテーマについて動画をいただいておりますので、そちらをご覧いただきます。Our next session is, It is a World Wide Web, but all politics is local. Planning to survive a Balkanizing Internet. Please welcome our speaker, Nay Melson.
Hello, everyone. My name is May Nelson. I'm a security innovation principal with Accenture Cyberstrike Intelligence based in Washington, D.C. area in the United States. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to attend this year's Code Blue conference virtually. My topic today, let me share my screen with you. So my topic today is about planning to survive a Balkanizing internet. This research is inspired by a client engagement. This particular client was investing in strengthening security controls and processes and overall strategy for one of their regional operations. During this engagement, it occurs to us that the industry often proposes a one-size-fits-all mentality to risk management and the network architectures needed to achieve it. Namely, do it the cheapest and the most efficient way possible, despite the fact that cyber threats has been evolving in the global context of an increasingly segmented internet. So in today's talk, I will start from the concept of internet balkanization and talk about the driving factors of internet balkanization and some trends I have observed. Then discuss the implication of internet balkanization for global businesses. Lastly, I will offer some mitigation measures to help organizations survive a balkanizing internet and improve business resiliency. Let's get to the topic. So what is internet balkanization? As we know, the internet is a massive network of networks that connect computers globally and allow computers to communicate and exchange information. The World Wide Web, an information sharing model that is built on top of the internet, was intended to communicate, share, and distribute information without borders. But since its birth, countries have varied in their understanding and the policies on how the internet should work in their jurisdiction. This leads to the concept of internet balkanization. The idea that internet could not only unite but also fragment us has actually existed for decades. And the different people have brought out different aspects of this. As early as 1997, two scholars from MIT wrote in the study Electronic Communities, Global Village of Cyber Balkans. The scholar explored the possibility that improving communications access through emerging technology will fragment society and balkanize interactions. What they were referring to was the segregation of users along lines of social, intellectual, and economic affiliations, which could divide people in the same way that geographic divisions do now. The term splinternet, when it first presented in 2001, refers to the potential benefit of parallel internet that would be run as distinct private and autonomous networks. As to the internet sovereignty concept, it was first introduced in China's 2010 white paper outlining China's position on the internet. As to the digital colonialism, focused on big tech companies developing and controlling tech ecosystem for commercial gain. The last one, globalization, means the idea of slowing globalization and potentially reversing it because of the threats of technological development. So all of this various concept of internet balkanization intertwines with each other, but the common theme is that the internet could be segmented, divided, balkanized, and centralized within a particular countries, all of which seem to be at odds with what the internet was supposed to be. So behind each concept of internet balkanization, there are reasons how the concept formulated. These reasons are often the driving factors which push the internet forward, push the trend forward. So as I said previously, the design of the internet is open, free, and borderless. Some do see the risk in an open internet. For example, scholars from Council on Foreign Relations in the US have summed up major risks of an open internet in this way. Digital nationalism, which is that governments and other actors inspired by governments bringing nationalism into online spaces and barricades the spaces from foreign influence, such as social media platforms. Threats to privacy and data security. This is often a question you and I, as consumer, ask when we use social media platforms, other online services. Threats to intellectual property. Many of you here are probably very familiar with defending your organization's IP from cyber-enabled economic espionage. The last one is a vulnerability to attacks, especially on critical infrastructure such as financial markets and power grids because of an open internet. Other factors include political, economic, social, and security factors. For example, some nation states and interest groups criticize the historical reality that the global internet is the US internet and argues that the US should not have what they say as undue power in the formulation of internet governance rights and standards. Emerging technology and on top of the internet has made some realize that possible commercial benefits of establishing individual tech ecosystems, such as regionally applicable applications. People also draw on religious and cultural factors in some regions in their arguments for segmenting and filtering the internet. State surveillance equipped with artificial intelligence, such as facial recognitions, often use national security reasons to protect cyber sovereignty. This driving factor push balkanizing internet. We also identified legislations in some countries that also fits a trend towards segmentation and internet balkanization. Since 2017, we have seen many countries promulgate laws and regulations to gain control over their citizens' data. The one famous one, for example, is the European Union's General Data Protection Regulations, or GDPR, which mandates the storage of EU data, citizens' data to be stored on the servers located within the EU borders. Many of you may be familiar with Japan's Act on the Protection of Personal Information, or APPI. And APPI was adopted in 2003, which was one of the first data protection regulations in Asia. The mandated APPI introduced it in May 2017 after the major overhaul because of several high-profile data breaches. In June this year, the law amending the Act was enacted. The new law expected to take effect in 2021 or the first half of 2022, which further strengthening rights for data subjects and increase penalties for non-compliance. In the past few years, more and more governments are increasingly resorting to internet cutoff in times of crisis. Reasons behind the shutdown include political and social stability, economic security, or geosecurity. Internet cutoff practice also vary. Some cut off the internet completely in one region or sever the region's connection with the outside world. Some may slow down the internet traffic so users cannot use certain social media platforms or live streaming content. And some establish a wholly separate internal network so user can access only state-allowed content. One thing to remember is that when governments shut down the internet, it's not just pushing a button, but involves techniques to manipulate the internet, as I just described. The main goal is to use the internet in one's governing region to silence or co-opt opposition political discourse or prevent activists from using the internet to organize protest. In a more market-driven country, the trend is towards balkanization due to geosecurity and economic security. For example, a ban on internet components from a particular country on the grounds that country may be putting malicious implants for espionage. This kind of mutually exclusive development could have much bigger impacts for the internet balkanization than just political isolation. As I mentioned, some governments choose whether to cut off the internet entirely or to a region, or whether to selectively filter it. Many countries have laws and the regulations which government could order internet service or provider to shut down services or take down website or filtering content. US sanction is another example. Sanctions such as restrictions on foreign companies' access to US technology will likely lead to the development of separate and non-interoperable technologies as technology decoupling continues. Lastly, governments can ban apps. In 2020, India banned a total of 224 Chinese apps. It is interesting to see that each time when the government announced a new app ban, many services offered Indian alternatives for those apps. What does balkanization for global? What does balkanization mean for global businesses? The first implication is a cost. Because of the global pandemic this year, many businesses are struggling to survive. Cutting costs is definitely one way to ensure business continuity. However, to the extent that internet standards, laws, and technologies in each country diverge from each other, organizations have to be aware related to cost, such as technical requirements for each environment and the compliances in each operating region would be costly to meet one by one. Also, organizations may have to spend effort and time building segmented network infrastructure, localizing data in each country, and integrating data across regions and countries. Lastly, business operating globally will have to make an effort to keep seamless online connectivities. For example, if one of your regional offices is in a country where often experience that internet cutoff, you need to have a plan to ensure that internet connectivities. This plan may involve actual budget to execute. The second implication is about supply chains. In some countries, we have observed the government policies towards restricting IT technologies from other countries based on economic protectionism or perceived national security threats. This tends to disrupt supply chains. Such policy first affected hard technologies such as semiconductors, then moved to digital platforms. With such governments, with some governments arguing, your platform cannot operate in my area unless yours operate in mine. So finally, such policy also affect data. As many say, data is the new oil. Data has economic and political values, and everybody from governments and businesses, even criminals and other threat actors have an incentive to obtain data and keep it for themselves. To the extent that this tendency continues, the balkanization would prevent global companies from integrating data across regions and limits the ability for business to involve services and offer global scale. Some would argue that if I cut my country's technology supply chain off completely from other countries, it would be hard for threat actors to attack. Supply chain risk management policy work from this idea. However, if we look at this from a defensive point of view, if a nation state is able to build an entirely autonomous supply chain, it would then attack other countries' supply chain without worrying about its own supply chain being affected. It is like creating a biological weapon, but making sure one's own soldiers are vaccinated against that pathogen. The third implication is about market access restrictions. This year, we are saying that government have published provisions on so-called unreliable entities or export control laws to restrict export exports of controlled items to defend national security and interests, or establish an entity list with actual license requirements or review process for the export or transfer of certain technologies. Countries have long had restrictions on dual-use technologies, fearing the export of weaponizable products to hostile countries. But the new restrictions can sharply in what were deeply symbiotic trade in civilian products. This government strategies that deal with regional supply chain issues would likely lead to market more fragmented. The fragmentation of market comes with a risk of market access restrictions, because business may find that they have less room to maneuver as they examine their operations for setting up headquarters or expanding markets to certain countries. In effect, government restrictions are increasingly making market participation choices for business. To a certain degree, this may create barriers for business growth and business scaling, especially for global businesses. The fourth implications is about data security and cyber attack. A balkanizing internet will likely increase data security risk because each region has its own data ecosystem. Organizations need to strategize on how to ensure the safety and the integrity of data in regions where they operate. As internet balkanization proceeds, nation states may be even more aggressive than before to conduct network operations in a segmented system because it will be less likely to affect their own system. Here I have two case studies that could provide scenarios for a potential future development. Previously, I mentioned that this year's Indian governments have banned the total of 224 mobile applications that they viewed as harmful to the sovereignty and integrity of India. As you may recall, India and China have engaged in increasingly hostile rhetoric and even border clashes this year. This hostility has spilled over to affect what was formerly a thriving economic relationship and trade. Imagine if you are a global company that operates in the region, have to deal with the app ban. The company may have to examine its security policy to see whether it uses any of these apps. Do you find alternatives if some of these apps are used in order to keep workflow and work efficiency? Also, how about the communications? If you have a bring your own devices policy, some employees may download an alternative app for communication, then introduce malware to your networks. Another case scenarios is about Russian internet sovereignty law. This is a research report about Russian internet sovereignty law published at a Center iDefense Intergraph portal in April 2019 when the law first passed. Russian internet sovereignty law proposes the use of Russian domain name systems and DNS, and the installation of deep pack inspection equipment, mapping of routing systems, and the centralized control of the Russian segment of the internet. Russian internet sovereignty law proposed an alternative Russian DNS citing fears that outside countries could try to cut Russia off from the world internet. So if a country builds its own DNS system and no longer depends on DNS servers in other countries, it could potentially unleash an attack on foreign servers without disruption to its own internet segment. Let's look at what an attack on DNS would look like. Many of you may remember in October 2016, DDoS attack on DNS provider Dyn. iDefense reported the attack on the day when it happened. The Dyn DDoS attack was one of the biggest distributed denial service attack ever launched. Some of major US websites and web services have had connectivity issues. Users were in panic when it happened because they could not connect to the social media they try to get on every day. And Dyn lost roughly 8% of its customer base in the aftermath of the attack. So if a nation state have an alternative DNS, the question that we should ponder are, so what is the possibility of a potential backup to conduct an offensive attack, since the attack only affects adversaries' DNS? Is it increasing possibility of a large-scale cyber attack because of segmented internet? Is it increasing difficult of tracing disinformation operators because the DNS alternatives would set barriers to trace a troll farm back to its national origin? So how can companies survive a balkanizing internet? Here, I will suggest a few ways you can prepare yourself for an increasingly fragmented legal and technological internet landscape. As I discussed previously about some indicator we have seen and the case scenarios, here I list a few examples of practical actions to architect for a balkanizing internet to cope with unforeseen geopolitical shifts. For example, regional policies and laws may prevent cross-border authentications. So your organization may need to consider implementing a regionally isolated Active Directory. Another example, since some countries require user data to reside in their country of residence, regional data governance strategies should be customer-fitted to each region's current and emerging landscape. Maintaining awareness to survive. Since the trends in internet connectedness are constantly evolving, maintaining awareness of cybersecurity campaigns and policy initiatives that are relevant to your business operations, including local, national, and multilateral initiatives, will help your organizations to plan ahead. Also be aware of any cyber threat activities targeting your industry or operating regions. Analyze and utilize any cyber threat intelligence from those threat activities so you can better defend your networks. Some other proactive measures that your organizations can take include conduct a tabletop exercise, identify indicator of internet isolations in the country where you operate, use worst case scenarios to test your organization's readiness for possible further escalations in the country in the future. Consider a geographic, consider a geopolitical threat intelligence program, even just hiring one knowledgeable expert if you don't already have such a program. Lastly, participating in the industry policy formulation process so your organizations can have a voice in industry policy and proactively prepare for any forthcoming changes. This includes my talk today. One final takeaway is that be prepared, you will survive a balkanizing internet. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will be very happy to answer any questions if you have, and reach me on LinkedIn and Twitter.